welcome to Camp Constitution Radio with your host, Hal Shurtleff. This show is heard on WBCQ The Planet every Monday night at 7:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. It's also on our YouTube channel. We put most of the shows up there within a reasonable amount of time from the broadcast. And also IPMNation.org, which is an online 24-hour news and information source that comes out of Concord, New Hampshire, 1:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time on Saturdays. And it's hosted or brought to you by Camp Constitution, which, among other things, runs a week-long family camp. And this year's camp is coming right up in July 2nd to the 9th at the Towanipi Christian Retreat Center in Ringe, New Hampshire. And we still have room for people if they're interested in coming, and we hope you can make it. Had a very interesting week last week. Since mid-February, I've been working as a full-time field rep for the Camp Constitution, or full-time director, I guess, but which includes field rep activities. And got back from a homeschool show in Lancaster, which I discussed last week. And Tuesday morning, we had a very interesting experience. I had a guest on the show here, about a month and a half ago, Pastor Bruce Wall from Dorchester, which is a section of Boston, talking about a parking lot across the street from his church, and how the city it was a crack house and a 3-family home that was abandoned, and it was used for a crack house and what have it. The city tore it down, city of Boston, and made Bruce, the Pastor Wall, the unofficial caretaker. And now a piece of land, and turned it into a parking lot, but it wasn't even paved. And that piece of relatively useless property 25 years ago is now worth $10 million. And anyway, he decided to have a prayer vigil or a prayer meeting in the office of Mayor of Boston. Now, the Mayor of Boston is very typical of your big city mayors. He's sort of a soulless, whatever the Democrat Party wants to do, he'll do, and he'll be very aggressive about it. And he's for open borders, and he's a big supporter of the homosexual lifestyle and the transgender, and let's see what else. Of course, pro-abortion, pro-Common Core. He was a big Hillary Clinton supporter, so he's very typical, even though he's from a Catholic background. It's kind of fascinating how many of these people were raised in a Christian upbringing, Catholic, what have you, and how quickly they reject everything that they were taught. I mean, everything, the whole 9 yards, but still consider themselves to be Catholics. It's just amazing. But anyway, that's I guess another issue for another time. And so so he invited me, and I brought Dr. Kishore along with me, and who's one of our instructors, and we had a really interesting time. We just prayed, sang some hymns, and there might have been about 30 people there, 25 to 30 people, mainly blacks, but there was a few white people and Hispanics. So it was a very interesting time, and we just prayed. The Bible does tell us to pray for our leaders. It doesn't say we have to it doesn't say we have to agree with them. It does tell us we do have to love them, although that's quite a challenge. But I agree with that, obviously. Being a Christian, I better agree with it. So we just prayed. We didn't condemn. We didn't say that, you repent or what have you. Just pray for guidance and wisdom and so forth, and that God's will be done. And I think it was more effective than angry signs and demonstrations and such. And I think that's really the key to reclaiming these lost cities, is really revival in our land and God's people of all different all different racial backgrounds and economic backgrounds coming to make a stance. It was interesting, too, on this Agenda 21. These kinds of things are happening all over the country. Now, yesterday, I went to church, and my pastor had a former colleague of his who was the guest pastor, I suppose, guest speaker. And this pastor, this gentleman, Steve York, I think, out of Colorado, his ministry deals with building new churches and focusing on urban areas that are relatively unchurched. And he gave some interesting statistics. And he was making reference to things that were Agenda 21 motivated, but I don't think it was he directly realized it. He mentioned that as cities become more vertical, that means more high-rises, the stack 'em and pack 'em. He said the populations are increasing, but the number of churches are going down in proportion of the number of, the number of buildings going up. And I thought, man, I wonder if these people who gave us these plans to build these stack 'em and pack 'ems and smart growth areas, I wonder if that was actually factored in. You get a small church and it's very expensive. You can't afford the rent. And that little building that you had, that little storefront church where there was no second floor, there may have been a second floor. The owner could have taken that, sold that lot, ripped down that building and put a 15 or 20-story condo there. And the rents were too high to move in. So that's an interesting fact, but it is sort of tragic just how many people are not involved with church activity. And sadly, in the Boston area, in most major cities, the churches are so far to the left with their rainbow flags and their Black Lives Matter, and we accept our Muslim brothers. Instead of promoting the gospel and calling for revival. But anyway, God is on the throne, and we like to think that we're going to be a little part of that with the good people in our ranks. And by the way, our camp is made up of people from different backgrounds. We're not a Bible camp in the strict sense of the word, but we do believe that there is a God in heaven, and God gave us our rights. But we have people from different backgrounds. We have Catholics and Protestants of various denominations. And that's the way I think we want to keep it, and I think that's the way it should be. And then let's see, what else did we do this week? It was went up to Maine, which is a place I love to go, especially this time of year. June is just one of the nicest. And after 4 or 5 days of rain, we finally had a couple of some nice weather. And I got to speak to a couple of groups giving presentations on Camp Constitution. And by the way, anyone listening around the United States and even other parts of the world, I am available to speak on different topics, but especially how you can create a Camp Constitution in your area and a presence in your area. So please feel free to contact me on that. But on the way up, if you go to our YouTube channel, you might see some various videos of local, some historical significance. I was up when I drove down to Lancaster, Pennsylvania. I stopped at the Daniel Boone homestead and interviewed a frontiersman, and I do things. I also stopped at the cemetery, a gravesite of Sybil Ludington, who was known as the female Paul Revere. And we've been doing these things on a regular basis since we formed Camp Constitution, as soon as we started a YouTube channel. But now that, again, when I'm doing this on a full-time basis, I have a little more opportunities to do that. And so on the way up to Maine, I stopped at Portsmouth, New Hampshire, which, by the way, is just over the bridge of Maine. It's very close. And stopped at Fort Constitution. And Fort Constitution used to be known as Fort William and Mary. And it was that fort that probably one of the earliest battles or skirmishes of the War for Independence, or the Revolutionary War. And it was an earlier ride of Paul Revere, where this was mid-December of 1774, where Paul Revere, there was a concern that the fort, which was occupied by the Britain, was very there was only a handful of sentries there, but they thought it was going to be resupplied. So this would have been a great opportunity for the local patriots to get the gunpowder and other items that could be used. So they dispatched him, and he rode through some very bad weather and met with some members of the Committees of Safety in Portsmouth, including one of the men who became a signer of the Declaration of Independence. And they took the fort without too much resistance and were able to get plenty of barrels of gunpowder and other useful implements. And it's sort of a little-known historical fact. People remember the midnight ride of Paul Revere, but they don't remember the afternoon ride of Paul Revere. Then we went up, and I had Dr. Cusheau with me, and we went to Portland, Maine, and we visited the Neil Dow House. And how I found out about the Neil Dow House was a few years ago, we had a table at the homeschool show in Maine, and there was a group from the Women's Christian Temperance Union, WCTU. And the WCTU, at one time, was very, very active and they played a key role in prohibition, getting the 18th Amendment passed. Now, I am not in favor of, I don't know if I lived at that point what my position would be, but I don't think repealing it at the federal level is the way to go. The best way to discourage drunkenness and drug addiction is education and morality and so forth. But they were well-intentioned people, and they have a pretty good worldview on other issues. They're obviously strong conservative Christians. But Neil Dow was known as the father of the prohibition. And Maine banned the sale and the transportation of alcohol long before the 18th Amendment. I think it was in the 1880s. So Maine became what is known as a dry state, mainly due to the efforts of Neil Dow. He was an incredible man. He was born in 1804, raised right in the Portland area. He became he was a Civil War general, which was a fascinating thing. He did run for public office. He was mayor of Portland. I think he ran for president a couple of times. And the WCTU and the Neil Dow Museum open to the public. It's only open a couple of days a week, and your best bet if you plan to visit it would be to go online and just put down Neil Dow Museum, I think .org. Well, I got a chance to interview the docent about the house. It was an incredible place, incredible library they had there, and just a lot of history, some documents signed by President Garfield, just a nice, and you get a good handle on the moral climate. Can you imagine a man like Neil Dow being elected today in Portland or any major city? It would be unthinkable. I mean, if he got 5% of the vote, that would be much. But it just shows you how far the moral climate has come, from a man of such high Christian standards to what you have today. Today, major city mayors, if they're not homosexuals and promoters of abortion and all the other vices, you're not going to get elected. So, anyway, I thought that was quite interesting. Then this wasn't a historical thing, but there's a place called the Wedding Cake House in Kennebunkport, Maine, and I just wanted to show it's a private residence, a beautiful home that was built in 1820, and it's one of the most photographed homes in the state of Maine. And I just wanted to show Doc what it looked like, and we ended up meeting the owner of the house, who was he's just about 90 years old now, and he gave us a little tour. So I thought that was pretty interesting. We made a good friend there with this gentleman. So anyway, this week we got other things going on. We're going to be having our table in Boston Common on the Constitution, just a little table that says take our 10-question quiz. How well do you know your Constitution? And we did this about a month ago, and we had a lot of success with it. And we're going to be doing things like this on a regular basis. And I just want to discuss a few things here. One of them is a book called The Con of the Con by Andy Biggs. Now, I've discussed the Article 5 Convention quite a bit, probably more than other issues. And why I think it's so important is because our Constitution is on the chopping block, and there are a lot of good conservative-type people that have kind of bought into this. And I think it's a great idea, and it's a terrible idea. And anyway, Andy Biggs was a state senator from Arizona, and he is now a member of Congress. I've not met Andy, but I was on a conference call with him, last year or so. I actually was after the election. And the sad thing about Arizona is that Arizona now passed an Article 5 resolution, an application for an Article 5 convention. But since he left, it was hard for him to, he wasn't there. He was the force to oppose it. And that's what you really need in these state houses. You can't have some elected officials that will do you a favor and say, yeah, okay, I'll submit the resolution. They have to be passionate about the issue, because the other side is these people are very passionate about their Article 5 resolutions and so forth. But anyway, it's only a let's see, about 169, 170 pages, and it's almost written in a conversational manner. And it's not something that it's not written by some humbug of a law professor. So, but he goes to, and then of course he also has a solution, because one of the arguments is say, well, what are you guys doing about it? We're trying to do something about the problem and so forth. And he lays out the plan. The same plan that, by the way, our founders wanted. First off, they expected people to be informed on how our government works. We don't have that today. They expect to know how their legislators at all levels, not only are they voting, but they expect that you communicate with them. They expect that you have an impact on these elected officials. And the sad thing is that most people in that district, whether it be a state district, a federal district, a congressional district, if those folks like big government, well, you're going to have big government until you can convince enough people that big government is not the way to go. But just passing amendments isn't going to help, because you're going to, first off, you're going to have trouble passing any amendments that will curtail the size and scope of government. And all these amendments that they propose are, there are things that the Constitution doesn't like foreign aid, balanced budget amendments. Well, there's nothing in the Constitution that says you have to have an unbalanced budget. If you stuck to the Constitution, the budget not only be balanced, it'd probably be a surplus every year. And it's interesting, too, these balanced budget amendment, and Andy covers this in his book, the balanced budget amendment that they're proposing, there's an escape clause in all of these proposed amendments. And the escape clause is you can't have a balanced budget if there's a war or there's a national emergency. Well, what is a national emergency? You look at your Constitution, and you don't see that in there. A national emergency is something that the president would declare, and we've been in a state of a national emergency, and I think there's a dozen of them or so for the last 12 years, since 1978. So if you pass a balanced budget amendment with that clause in it, you've just made that constitutional. You've just said a national emergency is something the president can do or Congress can do. It is a legitimate function. You've made that something unconstitutional, constitutional, while you were trying to roll back big government. So you've made government bigger. And some of these folks, they just don't get it. And I don't understand what their issue is. Why can't they see that? And they'll talk about, we need a parental rights amendment. Well, you have a parental rights amendment. It's called the 10th Amendment. And when you bring this up to many of these, the leaders of these Article 5 movement, the Article 5 Convention movement, if you say that, well, why can't states simply invoke the 10th Amendment? Oh, that you're a neo-Confederate, as Big Mouth Mark Levin will say. You're a neo-Confederate. Wait a minute. Every state official takes an oath to defend the Constitution. It was important to do. There was a reason for that. So the Constitution is valid in the states. It's not just something that's valid in Washington, D.C. And the state reps have an obligation to make sure that the Constitution is upheld. And the governor of those states also, and the state senators. So they say, wait a minute now, Obamacare, you're telling me my citizens in my state have to have this medical plan? This is unconstitutional. I took an oath to defend the Constitution. We're not going for it. But you see, the problem is these same legislators at the state level that say, oh, I'm a friend of the taxpayer, they can turn around and say, hey, we tried to do something about this, but I'm sorry, we did our best, but we just couldn't. We wouldn't have these evil opponents of an Article 5 just won the day. Well, they're lying. What they're worried about is the federal government taking funds away, taxpayers' money away. And that's really our biggest problem. You see, states have been willing participants in this federal overreach since the last 100 or more years. So when they say on one hand, oh, gee, we want to be fiscal conservatives, we want lower taxes, we want a balanced budget, and they turn around and say, we want the federal money for highways, we want the federal money for environment, we want the federal money to clean this up, we want the federal money to do this, we want the federal money for the schools. If these states really were serious, they would stop taking the federal money. But then they're either going to have to cut the program or they're going to have to raise the taxes. And they don't want to raise the taxes, and they don't want to cut the program, so guess what? You're going to be stuck with it. So that's really the issue here. So the state legislators are, and it was interesting, Mr. Mark Meckler, the founder of Convention of States, had a very interesting quote on the Living Room Conversations website. And let me recommend that you check this out for yourself. Don't take my word for it. Very biased against this man, so go check it out for yourself. And if it was been taken down, I'm surprised it's still there. I have a screenshot. But he's collaborating with Van Jones in this group, Living Room Conversations, which is a left-wing group that employs the Delphi technique to promote their agenda. And, of course, we're told by his critics, we're told by his supporters that Mr. Meckler is just, he's witnessing to these people, you see, just like Jesus would talk to the tax collector. So that's how they can kind of overlook that. I guarantee you, if I was showing up at Living Room Conversations and I'm there with Van Jones making a video, I'm sure they wouldn't be so kind in saying that I'm witnessing. You know, they'd be calling me a collaborator with the enemy, et cetera, et cetera. But Mark Meckler can do it because he's Mark Meckler, I guess. So anyway, in this quote, he says, I'm not quoting it verbatim, but he said that the elites run Washington, D.C. and state capitals. So if that is true, and I'm not disagreeing with that, I think in most cases he's correct, then why would you want the elites to run an Article 5 convention? If they run the state legislators, they run the state capitals, they're the ones that are going to be calling or applying for an Article 5 convention, and will be running an Article 5 convention. So he makes a good case against one in his own words. But it's just, people read that, no, they don't understand. It's only the Congress that's out of control. And when I was asking one of the more zealous defenders of an Article 5, fellow from Indiana, but he's posting here in a main Facebook page. But I say, define the elites, and of course he won't define them. Then he says, okay, Congress and the EPA. I said, no. I said, EPA is an unconstitutional entity. Don't tell me that's where the elites are. Most of them are run by bureaucrats. The person running it might be considered the elite. And don't say Congress. Congress aren't the elite. Congress are elected by the people that they claim won an Article 5 convention and being held back by a minority of people who have too much influence. The people are sending these people to Congress every 2 years. Every 2 years you can have a complete new member of the House of Representatives. But they keep turning these people back. And then they say, we need term limits. That's how we're going to save our country. Term limits. Then just vote them out. If all these people are in the same accord as they claim, vote them out. You know, no, we can't do it. They don't tell us elections are a waste of time. Well, elections aren't the way to go. We've tried that. It doesn't work. Really? So we should just sit home and let the left let every member of Congress be a far leftist, let the president be a far leftist, and we'll have some amendments, and that will save our country. So everybody there will be a Bernie Sanders protege in Congress, but we're going to have amendments like a balanced budget amendment, a term limit amendment, so we don't have to worry about it. We'll be okay. It just defies logic. It doesn't make any sense. And here's Mike Farris. He used to be with Convention of States. He's still very much involved, I'm sure, with the issue. He wants to have a 50-member Supreme Court. Oh, yeah, that's going to solve the problem. Not only that, but a lame duck session. Well, anyway, I'm going off. But anyway, this book, The Con of the Con, is available on Amazon. It's only available. It sells brand new for $12.95. I think you probably get used copies for a little bit less, and I highly recommend it. And then I'm going to finally discuss. I actually dedicated a show to this book, but I want to talk about a little bit more. This is a couple of years ago. Formation of the Union under the Constitution. And what I love about this, now this book is it's a hardback, and it's a heavy hardback. It's 885 pages, and it's published by the federal government. The federal government, in 1941, it was supposed to be the United States Constitution Sesquicentennial Commission. That was the 150th anniversary of the Constitution. And let's see, Saul Bloom from New York was the key member of that. It was kind of fascinating. Saul Bloom was a big supporter of the UN, but I have to say it's pretty sound information. Basically, it has a lot of historical documents in it, and it has a question and answers. And one of the questions was, what role does the federal government have in education? And of course, the answer is nothing. Oh, here's one here. Has there been any movement for a convention to propose amendments to the Constitution? Article 5 says that on the application of the legislators of two-thirds of the several states, Congress shall call a convention for proposing amendments. While the Constitution was under consideration by the ratification conventions, there was a considerable demand for a second convention. And the legislators of New York and Virginia made formal applications to the first Congress for one. In 1832, Georgia and 1833, Alabama renewed the request. Between 1893 and 1935, there have been proposals from 33 state legislators, some for a general consideration of amendments and others with reference to particular matters. Some legislators have voted for a convention several times. It is claimed that since more than two-thirds of the states have had asked for a convention, it is the duty of Congress to summon one, since the Constitution says nothing about the time within such two-thirds application may be made. The Supreme Court has, however, said in one of the statements about the ratification of amendments that we conclude that the fair interference or implication from an Article 5 is that the ratification must be within some reasonable time after the proposal. This reasoning would apply to proposals for a convention. So, I mean, there's 600 applications. There's probably more than that now. Anyway, so it does give Congress a lot of latitude. But it also has a nice little biographical sketch of the signers of the of Congress, or those that signed the Constitution, and it goes into the breakdown of the convention. But it also has some very interesting information. It has a letter that John Hancock sent to the states. I think the term was circular letter, opposing an Article 5 convention, and I believe that's the first time I made this known to some people. And this book, I got it for $1 at a local library, one of these library sales. In fact, I encourage your listeners to pop into your local libraries. These libraries are public venues. They're paid by taxpayers' money. But usually when you go into a library, at least in my experience, with some exceptions, you see a lot of left-wing organizations that put their stuff out there and have events. But the conservative patriot types, they somehow think the libraries are off limits. Well, they're not off limits. You should be donating books to the library. You should be putting your materials, your constitutions, your publications by subscription to the local library, and then make a news release. Make people know that, hey, this particular magazine, whether it be something dealing with guns or liberty or so forth. One magazine that I recommend is the New American, and I give subscriptions for libraries over the years for that magazine. In some cases, they're more than happy to accept it. In some cases, you got to be a little aggressive because the local librarian is not in favor of that. And I picked up this book for $1, and I went on to Amazon to see what the book may have been selling for when I first got it. I wasn't planning on selling it. I was just going to find out what it may be worth. And I think they were selling for like $4 or $5. And I tell you, just to ship this book would be about $4, media mail, because it's so heavy. But I started putting information in the book out on Facebook, taking pictures of parts of it, especially the Article 5. I did this about 6 months ago, and I was just curious to see what the book is selling for now. Now it's selling for $75 a copy. I think there's one left the last time I checked. So that's how you can impact the market, the price of a book, by certainly let people know it exists. And if there's some information in the pages of that book that it's important for people to get, well, the price is going to go up. Well, we're down to our last minute or so I want to just thank you for listening, and I encourage you to visit our website, and especially our Sam Blumenfeld archive. And I just got the numbers for May. Looks like we've got well over 200,000. I think 280,000 views and thousands of downloads of the material. So thank you. I hope maybe some of you people listening to this show have gone on and checked it out. Well, until next week, God bless you, and thanks for listening. You've been listening to Camp Constitution Radio on WBCQ The Planet.